He wrote a song that I'm sure you are very well aware of. It's called the National Anthem. As Americans, it is our song. However, we go to a ball game and we hear the words of that song.
I was going to say, if it had to do with the military.
Oftentimes, we don't even realize what's being sung. Most of us have memorized those words from time to time, but we've really never thought about what those words mean. Let me tell you a story. Francis Scott Key was a lawyer living in Baltimore. The colonies were engaged in vicious conflict with the mother country, Britain. Because of this conflict and the protractedness of it, they had accumulated prisoners on both sides. The American colonies had prisoners, and the British had prisoners. And the American government initiated a move. They went to the British and they said, let us negotiate for the release of these prisoners. They said, we want to send a man out to discuss this with you. They were holding the American prisoners in boats about 1,000 yards off the shore. They said, we want to send a man out to you by the name of Francis Scott Key. He's going to come out and negotiate and see if we can make a mutual exchange. And so on the appointed day, he rowed out in a little boat and went to this ship, and he negotiated with the British officials. And they actually reached the conclusion that these men would be exchanged on a one-for-one basis. Francis Scott Key was jubilant with the fact that he'd been successful. He went down beneath the bottom of those boats, and what he found was a cargo hold full of humanity, full of prisoners, full of men. He said, men, I've got some good news for you. Tonight, you're going to be free. He said, earlier today, I negotiated successfully your return to the colonies. You're going to be taken out of this boat, out of this filth, out of these chains. And then he went back up on board to arrange for the safe passage to the shore for these prisoners. And the admiral came and he said, we have a slight problem. The admiral said, we will still honor our commitment to release these men, but it will be merely academic after tonight. It's not going to matter. And Francis Scott Key said, what do you mean it's not going to matter? And the admiral said, well, Mr. Key, tonight we have laid an ultimatum upon the colonies. Your people will either capitulate and lay down the colors of that flag that you think so much of, or you see that fort right over there, Fort Henry? He said, we're going to remove it from the face of this earth. Francis Scott Key said, well, how are you going to do that? And the admiral said, well, if you'll scan the horizon of the sea, and you could look, you could see hundreds of little dots. He said, that's the entire British war fleet. All of the gunpowder and all of the armor is being called upon to demolish that fort. They will be here within striking distance in a matter of about 2.5 hours. Francis Scott Key said, well, the war's going to be over. These men are going to be free anyway. You can't shell that fort. That's a large fort, he said. It's predominantly not a military fort. It's full of women and children. And the admiral said, don't worry about it, he said. We've left them a way out. And Francis Scott Key said, well, what's that? And the admiral said, you see that flag way up there on the rampart? He said, we have told them that if they will lower that flag, that the shelling will stop immediately. And we will know by the lowering of that flag that they surrendered, and you'll now be under British rule. Francis Scott Key went down beneath and told the men what was about to happen. And the men asked, how many ships are there? And he said, there are hundreds of ships. And as the ships got closer, Francis Scott Key, he went back up on deck and he said to the men beneath, he said, I'll shout down to you and I'll tell you what's going on as I watch. As twilight began to fall and as the haze hung over the ocean, suddenly the British war fleet unleashed. Bam, 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 bam. He says the sound was deafening. There were so many guns, there was no relief. He said it was absolutely impossible to talk or to hear. He said suddenly the sky, although dark, was suddenly lit. And he says from down below, all he could hear from the men, the prisoners, were saying, Tell us where the flag is. Where's the flag? What have they done with the flag? Is the flag still there? Is the flag still flying over the rampart? Tell us. 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours into the shelling. Every time the bombs would explode, it would be close to that flag. They could still see the flag in the illuminated red glare of that bomb. And Francis Scott Key would report to the men down below. He would say, it's still up. The flag's still there. It's not down yet. And eventually the admiral came and he said, your people are insane. What's the matter with them? Don't they understand that this is an impossible situation for them? Key said that he remembered the words of George Washington when George Washington had said that the thing that sets the American Christian apart from all other people in the world is that he will die on his feet fighting before he'll live on his knees. The admiral said, we have now instructed all of the guns to focus on the rampart, to take that flag down. He said, there's something that we don't understand, however. He said, our reconnaissance tells us that that flag has already been hit directly again and again and again, and yet it's still flying. We don't understand that. Now we're about to bring every gun for the next 3 hours to bear down on that point. Francis Scott Key said that the barrage was unmerciful. All that he could hear was the men down below praying the prayer, God, keep that flag flying where we last saw it. Sunrise came, he said. There was a heavy mist hanging over the land, and there stood that flag, shredded, but you could still see the red, white, and blue colors. The flagpole itself was kind of at a crazy angle, but the flag was still flying at the top. And Francis Scott Key, he rowed ashore, and immediately he went inside Fort Henry to see what had happened. And what he had found was that that flagpole and that flag had suffered repetitious direct hits over and over again. And whenever it had been hit, it had fallen. But men and fathers who knew what it meant for that flag to be lying on the ground, although knowing that all of the British guns were trained upon it, would walk over and pick that flagpole up, and they literally held it up humanly until they died. Their bodies would be removed, and others would come and take their place and hold that flag in place. Francis Scott Key said that what held that flagpole in place at that unusual angle were the patriots' bodies. And the song goes like this. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we held at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming. For the rockets' red glare and the bombs bursting in air gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave for the land of the free and the home of the brave? It is my prayer that whenever we see the flag, that we'll always remember that story, and we'll always remember the price that was paid.
Anybody's ever heard that before?
Well, that's what I was trying to find for the kids when they were younger, and I would tell them about it, because every time I hear the Star Spangled Banner, that is the story I know.
That's amazing.
And I cry.
That's not the